In the history of the Second World War, there are some chapters so dark, so disturbing, that they've been deliberately buried for decades. Today, we're going to unearth one of them. We're talking about the story of Unit 731, a place where the noble pursuit of science was twisted into something truly monstrous. And it all began with a simple, believable lie. See, if you were to look at the massive complex in Pingfang, Manchuria from the outside, you'd think it was something harmless, maybe even helpful. The official story was that it was a water purification plant and a lumber mill, but that was just a cover. The reality behind those walls was a whole different story. It was one of the most sophisticated and horrific human experimentation facilities ever conceived. And the scale of this place, it's just staggering. This wasn't some small, secret lab tucked away in a basement. No, this was an entire, self-contained city built from the ground up with a single, terrifying purpose in mind. 6 square kilometers. Just let that number sink in for a moment. That's a huge, sprawling, totally self-sufficient complex, all of it dedicated to this one dark mission. We're not talking about a facility. We're talking about a purpose-built city of terror. And the infrastructure they had was just chillingly complete. It had its own railway line to bring in supplies and, of course, victims. It had its own crematoria for the grim task of disposing of the bodies, of the evidence. And inside, you had these advanced medical labs right next to something called a specialized insectary, which was basically a factory for breeding millions of plague-infected fleas for biological weapons. Every single piece of this city was designed for maximum efficiency in its horrific work. Now, it's really crucial to understand this next part. What happened inside this city wasn't just random, chaotic cruelty. Far from it. These were systematic, meticulously documented experiments, all carried out with a cold, clinical precision, and all of it done under the banner of scientific inquiry. This so-called research pretty much fell into several key categories. They were focused on testing the absolute limits of the human body, studying how deadly diseases spread, and of course, testing the effectiveness of new, horrifying weapons. So for example, to help out the Japanese Air Force, prisoners were locked inside these large pressure chambers. Scientists would stand outside and watch as they cranked the pressure down, documenting the exact moment the human body would horrifically fail. All of this was just to figure out how high their pilots could fly. The data was the prize. The human life was just part of the equation. In other labs, doctors would deliberately infect prisoners with diseases like syphilis. Then, at different stages of the illness, they would perform vivisections while the victims were still alive and conscious to see with their own eyes how the bacteria was attacking their internal organs. It was a step-by-step documentation of a person's destruction from the inside out. And then you had the weapons testing. The dehumanization here was just absolute. Human beings were referred to by the codename Maruta, which means logs. They were literally tied to stakes in open fields while researchers tested new biological and chemical bombs on them, watching from a safe distance to calculate how many died and how quickly the diseases spread. People were turned into nothing more than data points on a chart. So you have to ask yourself, who is the mind behind a nightmare like this? Well, that would be Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii, a brilliant man, a microbiologist, and the sociopathic architect of this entire program. This quote from Ishii himself really cuts right to the heart of the whole ideology. He genuinely, truly believed that this was the only path forward for medicine. In his view, human life wasn't sacred. It was just raw material for his research, totally unconstrained by pesky things like ethics or morality. And maybe the most chilling part of all is that Ishii wasn't some lone madman working in the shadows. He recruited the best and the brightest medical students from Japan's most elite universities. And for them, getting a post at Unit 731 wasn't a punishment. It was a prestigious career move. It was a chance to conduct research that was simply impossible anywhere else in the world. But as the war started to draw to a close, the focus for Unit 731 shifted dramatically. It went from research to pure concealment. And this led to one of the most controversial, cynical bargains in post-war history, a deal that's often been called the paperclip of the East. This timeline really shows you just how fast everything happened. When the Soviets invaded Manchuria in August of 1945, the order came down from the top: destroy all evidence. The facility was dynamited. And to make sure there were no living witnesses, the thousands of prisoners who were still alive were gassed. But the most valuable evidence of all, the reams of research data, that survived. And this is where the story takes another dark twist. American scientists back at Fort Detrick, which was the hub for America's own biological weapons research, found out about Ishii's work. And they saw the data not as a record of horrific war crimes, but as a priceless scientific treasure trove, information gathered from human subjects in a way that could never, ever be ethically replicated. And so, a deal was made. It was a simple trade, really. In exchange for all of their research papers, their pathology slides, all of their data on human experimentation, the United States gave Shiro Ishii and his entire team full immunity from prosecution at the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunals. The men behind these atrocities, they all walked free. A deal like that casts a very, very long shadow. That immunity bargain led directly to decades of official silence, not just from the perpetrators who went on to have successful careers in medicine and business, but also from the governments that helped cover the whole thing up. For decades, the story of Unit 731 was dismissed as a rumor, as wartime propaganda. But a truth this big, it has a way of coming out eventually. In the late 1980s, former personnel, who were old men by then, started to confess. Then, in the 90s, the physical evidence started to appear, with the discovery of mass graves. That wall of silence finally began to crumble.
Today, the site of the old facility in Harbin, China, is home to a museum. It stands as a memorial to make sure that the victims, once dehumanized with that codename Maruta, are finally remembered, not as logs, but as human beings who suffered unspeakably in the name of a twisted science.
And that brings us to the one question that just hangs over this entire story. A deal was made, horrific crimes were pardoned to preserve scientific data. And it forces us to confront this incredibly uncomfortable ethical problem. Can any knowledge be so valuable that it justifies burying the truth and letting monsters walk free? The data was saved, yes, but you have to ask, what was the real cost to justice and to our own shared humanity?